My name is Lucy MacLean, and I'm an active contributor to the well-being of my community.
Hello, and welcome to Drunk on Tea. Today, I'm going to paint up a miniature of Lucy from the Fallout TV series, ideal for your games of Fallout Wasteland Warfare.
Okie dokie.
I don't set the world.
So the first thing I've done is I've primed the model black, as this will give us a nice, smooth, even base coat for the rest of our colours to work from. Now the first thing I'm going to do is come in with some Cantor blue, and we're going to paint all of the fabric to the model. So this Cantor blue is going to give us that iconic Vault Dweller look from the Fallout games and the TV series. So at this stage, I'm just going to carefully apply a couple of layers of Cantor blue to all of the fabric of her Vault Dweller suit, building up in a couple of layers until I get a nice solid, even base coat of Cantor blue all over the fabric. You don't have to worry about being too neat at this stage. Can get some of the Cantor blue over other areas, as we will be coming back in later and painting over these with a different colour. For now, just make sure you coat all of the fabric with a couple of layers of Cantor blue. And after a couple of layers of Cantor blue, you can see we've got a solid base coat all over that Vault Dweller suit. Now the next thing I'm going to do is pick out the tiny detail of her undershirt. So for this, I'm coming in with some Celestra Grey. I'm just going to very carefully pick out the little bit of undershirt that's showing through the middle of her Vault suit. And with that little bit of undersuit picked out, the next thing we're going to do is paint any of the leather on the model. So for this, I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide. I'm going to pick out all of the straps, parts of leather that are on the model. So she's got quite a few straps coming down her body and her belt, and of course this one on her shoulder. So I'm just going to make sure I carefully pick all of these out with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide so I get a solid coat over all of the areas I want to be leather. At this stage, as well as picking out the belt and any straps, I'm also going to pick out her knee pads and shoulder pads, and she's got a wrist guard as well. I'm going to make sure I pick all of these out with a couple of layers of Rhinox hide. And with the Rhinox hide applied, you can see that's broken up the blue colour on the model, added some interest. So the next thing I'm going to paint is the bag that she's holding. For this, I'm coming in with some Mournfang Brown. I'm going to paint this all over her rucksack. Now if you want to be true to the TV series, paint this with Cantor blue at the same time as painting the Vault suit. But I think by having a light brown bag, it adds a little bit of interest to the model, breaks up that blue, and just adds a little bit more detailing to this beautiful model. So just make sure you coat all of the backpack with a couple of layers of Mournfang Brown to build up to a solid brown colour all over the bag. And with that Mournfang Brown applied, you can see it's picked out the rucksack. So the next step will be to pick out all of the yellow detailing that's on the model. So for this, I'm coming in with some Avalan Sunset. I'm going to very carefully pick out all of the trim to the Vault suit. So this blue and yellow is the iconic colours of the Fallout Vault Dweller suit. So make sure you pick all of the trim areas out with a couple of layers of Avalan Sunset, being really careful around all of the other details on the model. So if you do make any mistakes, you can come back in with the other colours and paint over the yellow really easily. I'm also going to pick out the roll mat on the top of the rucksack with Avalan Sunset as well. Going to give this the same yellow colour as the rest of the trim on her Vault Dweller suit. And make sure at this stage you pick out the numbers on the back of the suit as well. She's got 33 on the back of her suit. So pick this out along with all the rest of the trim with some Avalanche Sunset. And with that yellow applied, you can see it's really added interest to the model, really giving it that Vault Dweller look from Fallout. So the next thing to do is to paint the skin. For this, I'm coming in with some Bugman's Glow. I'm just going to carefully apply this all over the areas of skin on the model. So it's Lucy's face here and her hands. Just going to carefully make sure I pick all of these out with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow. When you're working around other details, try and be nice and careful to make sure you don't get this over anything else. Just make sure you coat all of the skin with a couple of layers of Bugman's Glow. And after all of the skin has been picked out, the model's really starting to come together now. So the next thing I'm going to do is base coat the boot and her hair. So for this, I'm coming in with some Corvus Black. I'm going to paint all over her boots. And I'm also carefully paint all of her hair at this stage as well. Going to make sure I coat all of this with a layer of Corvus Black. And with the Corvus Black applied, there's just one final base coat left to apply to this model, and that will be to pick out all of the metallic areas. So for this, I'm coming in with some Lead Belcher. I'm going to carefully apply this over the Pip Boy on her wrist. Don't worry about getting this over the screen at this stage, just paint all of the Pip Boy with some Lead Belcher. I'm also going to pick out the pistol in her hand as well, being really careful around the areas of skin we've already painted. And I'm also going to just pick out any details that we want to be silver on the rest first. There's a couple of trinkety bits and areas of buckles and things. Just make sure you pick these out with some Lead Belcher as well. And with that Lead Belcher applied, that's all of the base coats applied to the model. So the next step is to shade the miniature. So first of all, I'm coming in with some Reichland Flesh Shade. I'm going to apply this all over the areas of skin. So over her face and her hands. Going to make sure I shade all of these with some Reichland Flesh Shade. With some Agrax Earthshade. I'm going to come in and shade the backpack just over the areas of Mournfang Brown. I'm not going to shade the Avalanche Sunset with the Agrax Earthshade, just making sure I cap this all over the Mournfang Brown to shade that rucksack. And finally, with some Nuln Oil, I'm going to shade everything else. So it's Lucy's hair, her Vault suit, all of the Rhinoc tide, all of the metallic details, everything else we painted. Just going to make sure I shade all of this with a shade of Nuln Oil.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have just let you use me as bait in a poison river!
If you're enjoying the video, please press like. If you want more videos, press the subscribe button and ring the notification bell. If you would like to support the channel and become a member, please press the join button down below.
Do unto others as you'd have done unto you.
And after those shades have dried, you can see they've added definition all over the model. So now it's time to start highlighting the miniature. So the first thing I'm doing is I'm coming in with some Rhinox hide, and with this I'm going to very lightly dry brush all over the hair to the model. This will give the impression of a dark brown hair colour like Lucy has in the TV show. Just be nice and careful, just dry brush a little bit of Rhinox hide carefully all over the hair. And with that Rhinox hide dry brushed on, you can see it's added interest and a brown tone to the hair. Now it's time to start highlighting the skin. So to start with on the skin, I'm coming in with some Bugman's Glow again. I'm going to very carefully apply this in all the areas the shade didn't settle. There's areas here like her nose, her cheeks, her lips, everywhere that the White Flesh shade didn't settle. Coming back in, bringing it back up to its original colour with a thin layer of Bugman's Glow. So wherever the shade settled in a recess, I'm coming on either side and bringing it back up to colour with a layer of Bugman's Glow. With that Bugman's Glow applied, it's lightened up some of those areas of skin. So now I'm coming in with a 50-50 mix of Bugman's Glow and Cadian Flesh Tone. I'm going to apply this in the middle of all the areas that I just applied the previous step. So you want to focus this onto the more prominent areas of the face, the upwards facing areas, leaving a little bit of the Bugman's Glow showing through, coming into the middle of all of those areas and applying a little bit of this mix. So on the hands here I'm focusing onto the fingers and the knuckles and areas like that, and just brightening those areas up with a little bit of this mix. You can see with that mix applied, it's brightened up the skin a little bit and added a bit more definition to the face. So now with some pure Cadian Flesh Tone, I'm going to once again apply this in the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous step. So really focus this into the smaller areas, most raised details and upwards facing areas, and just apply a little bit of pure Cadian Flesh Tone into the middle of all the areas that we just applied our previous step. On the hands here, I'm really going to focus this onto the sharpest points of the knuckles, most raised details, and the edges of all the fingers. And with the Cadian Flesh Tone applied, there's just one final step left to apply to highlight the skin. And that'll be with some pure Kislev flesh. I'm going to come in and just focus this onto the most raised and sharpest point. So it's things like her nose, bottom lip, chin, sort of the bones of her cheeks. It's just the very tops of her knuckles and tips of her fingers. I'm applying a little bit of Kislev flesh, just a small highlight to brighten up these areas. And with that Kislev flesh applied, that is the skin highlighted. But the next step, just to finish off the face, will be to paint in the eyes. So for the eyes, I'm coming in first with some Abaddon Black. I'm just going to sink this into the recesses of her eye sockets. So being really careful around all the areas we've already painted and highlighted, just sinking a little bit of Abaddon Black into the recesses of the eye sockets. And now with some White Scar, I'm going to very carefully come in and apply a thin line in the middle of the black we just applied. Being really careful, keeping this nice and thin, just applying a small white line in the middle of the black. And then finally, with some Abaddon black again, just going to very carefully apply a small vertical line in the middle of the white, and this will act like a pupil. Be very careful, just keep this nice and small, just apply a line in the middle of the white we just applied. And with the eyes picked out, that is the face to the model painted. So now it's time to start highlighting her vault suit. For this, I'm coming in with Cantor Blue again first. Much like with the skin, I'm going to apply this on all of the raised areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever the shade settled in a crease or a recess, I'm coming in on either side, bringing the rest of that fabric back up to its original colour with a thin layer of Cantor Blue. There's a lot of creases and detailing in these vault suits, so just leave all of those areas shaded with the known oil. Just bring some of the larger, flatter areas and the edges of all the creases back up to colour with some Cantor Blue. So take your time at this stage, work your way around the model, pick out all of the areas that the shade didn't settle, just bring them back up to their brighter colour with a thin layer of Cantor Blue. And with the Cantor Blue applied, you can see it's brightened up some of those areas of her vault suit. So the next step is with a 50-50 mix of Cantor Blue and MacLeod Blue. I'm coming in and applying a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas that we just applied the pure Cantor Blue. To really focus this onto the most raised areas, highest points and upwards facing surfaces, areas that would catch the light the most, but leaving a bit of that Cantor Blue showing through at the edges, as this will build up a really nice transition to our brightest highlights and give a really interesting look all over the vault suit. So once again, just take your time at this stage, work your way back around the model, applying a little bit of this mix in the middle of all the areas we just applied our previous step. With that mix applied, you can see it's really building up that transition from darker colours to our brighter highlights. Now the next step is with some pure MacLeod Blue. I'm coming in and I'm just going to apply this once again in the middle of the areas I just applied the previous step. So really focus this onto the highest points, most upwards facing areas, and just apply a little bit of pure MacLeod Blue in the middle of all the areas we just applied our previous mix. Remember to keep this paint nice and thin, leave a little bit of the previous layers showing through so we build up that nice transition to our bright highlights. And with the pure MacLeod Blue applied, you can see it's really brightened up those areas of her vault suit. So there's just one last colour to apply to highlight the vault suit, and that's going to be with some Altdorf Guard Blue. I'm going to come in and apply an edge highlight to all of the raised details and all the sharpest points of the suit. So all of these raised areas here, I'm catching these with a thin edge highlight of Altdorf Guard Blue. So whereas the very tips of all of the creases and all the sharpest points, I'm catching these with a really thin edge highlight of Altdorf Guard Blue. There's a lot of details to make sure you catch at this stage, but really is worth taking the time, working your way around the model nice and slowly, picking all of these out with a thin edge highlight will really make this model pop and add interest all over. You can see here the edge of every area I applied, a bit of the previous layers. I'm picking out the very sharpest points with a thin edge highlight of Altdorf Guard Blue. And with that Altdorf Guard Blue applied, that is all of the Vault Suit edge highlighted. So the next step will be to highlight the areas of yellow.
I thought I was here to be a sex slave.
What? No! What a disgusting idea! I'm simply going to harvest your organs.
So for this, I'm coming in with Avalanche Sunset again first. And I'm going to place this on all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So much like with the Vault Suit fabric, wherever the shade settles in a recess, I'm leaving that and coming on either side with a little bit of Avalanche Sunset to bring it back up to colour. I'm also going to brighten up any areas on the suit that may have got darkened by the shade as well. With the Avalanche Sunset applied, it's brightened those areas of yellow back up. So now it's time to apply an edge highlight. For this, I'm using Uriel Yellow. And I'm just going to pick out the raised details and sharpest edges of anything that we painted with yellow. So all the edges to the trim on Lucy's Vault Suit. I'm picking these out with a thin edge highlight of Uriel Yellow. Obviously be really careful around all the other colours, just keeping this nice and thin. Picking out the edges of all of those yellow details. And on the bedroll, I'm making sure I pick out the tops of all the folds and creases with a thin edge highlight of Uriel Yellow as well. And with the yellow highlighted, the model's really starting to come together now. It's really got that look of Lucy from the Fallout TV show. So now it's time to start highlighting the leather. For this, I'm coming in first of all with a 50-50 mix of Mournfang Brown and Rhinox Hide. And for this, I'm picking out some of the raised details, the edges, some of the parts of the leather. I'm applying a thin layer of this mix to areas I want to add a little bit of interest to start brightening up some of these spots, to give them that appearance of worn leather. So areas that might get the most use, some of the upward facing surfaces as well, I'm just applying small patches of this mix to those areas that we painted with Rhinox Hide earlier. So there is quite a lot of leather on this model, so make sure you pick out some large areas and some small patches. Just apply a little bit of this mix onto all of those areas we want to start brightening up. And with that mix applied, it's the first step in brightening up the leather to create a nice worn leather appearance. So now with some pure Mournfang Brown, I'm keeping this nice and thin again, and I'm applying this into the middle of the areas I just applied the previous mix. On areas that are near the edge, I'm going to focus this towards the edges of the leather, areas that would get the most use, and areas that would be the most beaten up or worn. So just go back around the model again, and applying a little bit of Mournfang Brown in the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous mix. By keeping this nice and thin, it will allow some of the other layers to show through and create a really nice transition from dark to light to really give that beaten, worn leather appearance. You can see with that Mournfang Brown applied, really is brightening up that leather and giving it an old worn look. Now with a 50-50 mix of Mournfang Brown and XV88, I'm going to once again really thinly apply this in the middle of the areas we just applied the previous layers, building up, brightening it up nice and slowly, so we get a really good transition from the dark, pure Rhinox hide up to our brighter highlights. Some of these patches are going to be really small. You can apply this a little bit scratchy as well, it doesn't need to be neat. Some scratches really do add to that leather appearance. And with that mix applied, there's only one final colour left to apply to these leather areas to give them that really worn, beaten leather look. And that's with some pure XV88. I'm coming in and applying a little tiny spot of this in the centre of all the areas that we applied the previous layers. Once again, keep this nice and thin, nice and small. By using this as our brightest highlight on this leather, it really does give it that old, worn leather look that you see all across the Fallout universe. So once again, just take your time at this step, apply small amounts of pure XV88 into the middle of all the areas we've been applying our previous layers. And with that applied, you can see it's really given the leather that worn, used look. It's really made it look like it's been through the wars, which is ideal for Fallout. So now it's time to start highlighting her rucksack. For this, I'm coming in with Mournfang Brown first, and I'm applying this on all the areas that the shade didn't settle. So wherever we've got some of the Agrax Earth shades settled in a recess, I'm coming in on either side and highlighting all of those flat and raised surfaces back up to their original colour with a thin layer of Mournfang Brown. So there's a lot of creases and folds on this bag, so make sure you just work your way around slowly, pick them all out with a little bit of Mournfang Brown. And with the Mournfang Brown applied, you can see it's brightened up the bag, left the definition in all of the recesses, it's giving us nice base to build up for our highlights. So now with a 50-50 mix of Mournfang Brown and Scrag Brown, I'm coming in and very carefully applying these in the middle of all the areas we just applied the previous step. So I'm going to leave a little bit of Mournfang Brown showing through, apply a little bit of this mix in the middle of all of those areas, we build up to a nice bright highlight. And with that mix applied, you can see it's really brightened up those areas of her backpack. But there's one final layer to apply to her rucksack, and that's with some pure Scrag Brown. I'm coming in and applying this as an edge highlight to all of the sharpest points on her rucksack. So really take your time at this stage, just pick out all of the edges, all of the sharpest folds and details with a really thin edge highlight of pure Scrag Brown. So there's a lot of creases, a lot of folds, a lot of edges. Make sure you catch all of these with a really thin edge highlight of Scrag Brown. And with the rucksack highlighted, Lucy's really starting to come together now, really starting to look really good. Now it's time to highlight the boots. For this, I'm just coming in with some Mechanica Standard Grey. I'm just going to apply a thin edge highlight to all of the edges of the details on her boot. So it's to pick out things like any creases, any folds, the laces, the tips of her boots, all of those sort of details. I'm just picking them out with a really thin edge highlight of Mechanica Standard Grey. Just focus this onto all the sharpest points and most raised details on the boots. Just pick them out with a thin edge highlight of grey. And with the boots highlighted, there's only a couple of details left to pick out on the model now. One of those will be to highlight all of the metal. For this, I'm coming in with some Stormhost Silver. Just going to carefully pick out all the sharpest edges to anything we painted metal with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. So it's all the sharp edges to a pistol. Any of the little trinket details we painted on her vault suit. And I'm also going to pick out all the edge details to the Pip Boy as well. So make sure you pick all of these details out with a thin edge highlight of Stormhost Silver. With the metal highlighted, the only detail left to do now is to paint the screen on her Pip Boy. For this, I'm coming in with some Caliban green first. I'm going to very carefully paint this over the screen on the Pip Boy, being really careful not to get this over any of the other metallic details. Just painting over the screen with some Caliban green. And now with some War Flesh. I'm going to carefully paint this into the top, sort of half of the screen, focusing it into the top right hand corner. And finally, with some Warpstone Glow, I'm going to paint some little dotted lines all over the screen that will look like text. With that detail applied, is how to paint Lucy from the Hollywood Heroes set for your games of Fallout the Miniatures game.
You're in the best place in the world. We're in a vault.
So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video. Please let me know in the comments down below, are there any other Fallout models you would like to see me paint? Don't forget to like and subscribe, and happy painting!